In the 1930s, food scarcity was a daily crisis, but even with gardens failing and pantries bare, families found ways to endure, not with abundance, but with ingenuity. Let's look at 6 surprising survival food hacks from the Great Depression, how they worked, and what they can still teach us today. Saving and sharing seeds. Food security starts small. In the Great Depression, seeds were more valuable than silverware. It was a necessity to save seeds, a kind of homegrown insurance policy against hunger. Every family with a patch of dirt learned the careful process of collecting seeds from whatever they managed to grow: tomatoes, beans, lettuce, corn, squash, cucumbers, and even herbs like dill or parsley. After harvesting, seeds were rinsed, air-dried on flour sack cloths or newspapers, and stored in reused envelopes, glass jars, or old tobacco tins. Some families even made their own seed packets from folded paper. But what made seed saving especially powerful was the collective nature of it. Neighbors and relatives would barter or exchange seeds to diversify their crops. Church socials, county fairs, and PTA meetings sometimes included informal seed swaps where families could trade a handful of saved pole beans for someone else's sugar peas. Some towns organized seed-sharing clubs that coordinated planting, ensuring that not everyone grew the same crops. This was a strategy that allowed for cooperative harvesting and preservation later in the year. This also gave birth to the concept of relief or thrift gardens, which were funded by the federal government. Many relied on heirloom vegetables, old and pure varieties passed down through generations, known for their flavor and ability to be replanted year after year. In this way, saving and sharing seeds became not only a practical necessity, but a symbol of community trust and shared survival. Foraging: dandelions, bark, and bugs. When kitchen shelves were bare and money was non-existent, families turned to nature for food. Foraging became a full-blown survival skill. Children as young as 6 or 7 were taught by parents or grandparents how to recognize edible plants. Urban backyards, vacant lots, and country fields were combed for greens like dandelion, chickweed, lamb's quarters, purslane, plantain, and sorrel. Dandelion leaves were often the first spring green to emerge, and they were prized for their nutrients. They were boiled to remove bitterness, sautéed with fat if available, or added to soups. In rural areas, people scouted for wild onions, wild garlic, elderberries, and morel mushrooms, which were dried for winter use. Acorns, after leaching out the tannins, were ground into flour for baking. Pine trees, particularly their inner bark, were scraped and boiled into a starchy gruel. Even cattails were harvested, their roots boiled, their pollen used as flour, and their young shoots eaten raw or cooked. Protein was harder to come by, and some families resorted to extremes. Grasshoppers and crickets were caught in fields and fried with salt if available. Ant eggs, frog legs, and turtles occasionally made appearances in soup pots. Preserving and canning glass jars meant survival. Without electricity and refrigeration, food preservation was a matter of urgency. Home canning became a critical domestic art. Women gathered in steamy kitchens throughout late summer or early fall, preserving whatever could be grown, foraged, or bartered. Green beans, okra, corn, tomatoes, peaches, pears, and beets were boiled, salted, or pickled, packed tightly in jars, and sealed with care. Families preserved jam from fallen fruit gathered from roadside trees or from neighbors who let them glean leftover harvests. Even fruit that was overripe or bruised could be cooked into preserves or sauces. Pressure canning, although less common due to cost, was used by those who could afford it to safely store meats, soups, and low-acid vegetables. Others relied on boiling water baths and added vinegar, salt, or sugar to inhibit spoilage. Jars were a precious commodity. People reused them year after year, carefully inspecting for chips or cracks that could cause sealing failures. Lids were sometimes reboiled and used again despite manufacturer warnings, and wax seals were common alternatives. Those who couldn't get jars might use wax-sealed tins, reused coffee cans, or crocks buried in cool earth. Root cellars and ice houses played a key role too, with onions, potatoes, turnips, and apples stored in straw to keep them through the winter. A pantry filled with neat rows of preserved food wasn't just a source of pride, it was the difference between nourishment and malnourishment when snow blanketed the ground and nothing grew. Using every edible part, nose to tail, root to stem. During the Depression, the line between food and waste was nearly erased. Every part of an animal or plant was used, reused, and honored. Families boiled animal bones for hours, sometimes over multiple days, to make broth, which was then stretched with barley, rice, or root vegetables. If meat was scarce, the broth alone, rich with fat and gelatin, provided flavor and nutrients. Almost every dish was watered down. Fat was rendered from pork into lard, used for frying everything from potatoes to cornbread. Chicken fat, or schmaltz, was skimmed and saved in jars. Chicken feet, necks, hearts, and gizzards went into stews. Pig's feet were pickled, tongues were boiled and sliced thin, and livers were pan-fried or made into simple pâtés with onions. Even brains were scrambled with eggs when available. On the vegetable side, beet greens, radish tops, or carrot fronds were turned into sautéed side dishes or chopped into soups. Potato peels were scrubbed and fried for snacks. Corn cobs, once the kernels were eaten, were boiled to make sweet cob jelly. Jellies were even made from corned beef and gelatin. Onion skins colored broth and sometimes fabric for homemade dyes. Apple cores and peels were boiled into jelly or vinegar. Even ashes from burned corn cobs were sometimes used as lye for making soap. Nothing was taken for granted. Every part of every ingredient had a second purpose, and often a third. Substitutions and mock meals, making something from nothing. A lot of cooking had to be improvised in the absence of the usual staples. Hoover's stew, a staple in soup kitchens and humble homes, was cobbled together from macaroni, chopped hot dog ends, stewed tomatoes, canned corn, and occasionally beans or onions. It simmered in giant pot, and its flavor depended entirely on what could be found. It fed dozens of people, sometimes for days. Families boiled weeds like dock, lamb's quarters, or curly mustard greens, often harvested from roadsides or ditches, as a substitute for collards or spinach. When apples were too expensive, resourceful bakers turned to Ritz crackers. The crackers, softened with water, sugar, cinnamon, and lemon juice, mimicked apple pie filling so convincingly that some people didn't realize it wasn't fruit. Wacky cake, also known as depression cake, required no eggs, milk, or butter. Made with vinegar and baking soda to provide lift, it used vegetable oil and whatever sugar was on hand, molasses, sorghum, or even boiled down fruit syrup. Coffee substitutes included roasted chicory, barley, or even burnt toast steeped in hot water. Mashed pinto beans stood in for sandwich spreads or even meatloaf base. These substitutions helped people feel normal, even when times weren't. Scraps reused, food had multiple lives. In Depression kitchens, food didn't end its life on the plate. It cycled back into the system in surprising and indigenous ways. Leftover biscuit or pie dough became dumplings for soup or cobblers. Biscuit crumbs were often mixed with milk or eggs to make savory patties. Potato water from boiling was saved to thicken gravies, cook grains, or even water down milk to stretch it. Pasta water was reused to wash dishes or feed animals. Crushed eggshells were fed to chickens as a calcium supplement or used as an abrasive for scrubbing pots. Citrus peels were dried and burned for scent or steeped to clean cutting boards. Even the water from canned vegetables and beans were added to soups or rice to preserve flavor and nutrients. Households with livestock fed pigs or chickens with peelings, stale bread, or meal scraps. Composting, though it didn't carry that name, was practiced instinctively. Apple cores and vegetable stems were tossed into garden trenches or buried to enrich soil. Nothing was wasted, not because it was trendy, but because each scrap was a small guard against hunger. Children learned early. Leftovers weren't trash. They were tomorrow's lunch, or fuel for the garden, or feed for the hens that laid the next day's eggs. Waste was a luxury no one could afford. Maybe today, in a world of overconsumption and waste, the food hacks of the Depression era are worth remembering, not just to honor the past, but to prepare for whatever comes next. Resourcefulness pays off, no matter when or where. As always, thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay creative, and never underestimate what you can do with very little. See you in the next one.